The moon hangs full over the Bay of Biscay. July 5th, 1942. 2:17 in the morning. Squadron leader Jefferson Herbert Greswell pushes his Wellington bomber into a shallow dive, engines throttled back to near silence. Below him, invisible in the darkness, a German U-boat surfaces to breathe. The submarine crew thinks they are safe. They are wrong. At exactly 50 yards, Greswell flips a switch. 22 million candle power of pure white light explodes from beneath his aircraft. The night becomes day. The submarine freezes in perfect clarity. Deck crew scrambling, officers diving for the hatch, wake spreading white behind the hull. 3 seconds later, 6 depth charges drop. The U-boat breaks in half. 52 men die before they can send a distress signal. The entire attack lasts less than 10 seconds. This is the weapon that Nazi Germany feared most. Not a bomb, not a torpedo, a flashlight. But here is the part that will blow your mind. The man who invented this weapon had no engineering degree, no physics training, no official authorization. He built his prototype from car headlights and salvaged aircraft parts in a workshop where he was explicitly forbidden to work. His commanding officers threatened him with court-martial. The Air Ministry engineers laughed at his calculations. Every expert in Britain said his idea violated the laws of electrical engineering. His name was Humphrey de Verd Lee, a 44-year-old squadron leader that nobody took seriously. A pilot so old that his fellow airmen joked he learned to fly on a pterodactyl. Within 5 months of his first illegal test, his invention sank more submarines than the entire Royal Air Force managed in the previous 2 years of war. Within 2 years, German U-boat commanders refused to surface at night, even when their batteries were dead and their crews were suffocating.
Admiral Karl Dönitz lost so many submarines that he temporarily withdrew his entire fleet from the North Atlantic. German sailors gave the Bay of Biscay a new name, Das Todeslicht, the Valley of Death. And it all started because one man looked at an impossible problem and said 4 words that changed history. Watch this work. To understand why Humphrey Lee's flashlight was so revolutionary, you need to understand why Britain was losing the Battle of the Atlantic in 1942. The numbers are horrifying. In the spring of 1942, German U-boats were sinking Allied merchant ships at a rate of 400,000 tons per month. That is roughly 60 ships disappearing beneath the waves every 30 days. Each ship carried food, fuel, weapons, medicine. Each ship carried men who would never come home. Britain is an island. Everything it needs to survive comes by sea. Food, oil, steel, ammunition. Winston Churchill later admitted that the U-boat threat was the only thing during the entire war that truly frightened him. The math was simple and terrifying. If the sinking rate continued, Britain would run out of food in 12 weeks. The nation would starve before it could surrender. The problem was darkness. German Type 7 submarines were not impressive weapons in daylight. On the surface, they could make 17 knots, but they were fragile, slow, and carried only 14 torpedoes. Submerged, they were nearly blind, crawling at 7 knots, with batteries that died after 90 minutes. But at night, they were lethal. The U-boat commander would surface under darkness, recharge his batteries, race ahead of the convoy at full speed, and submerge before dawn to attack from perfect position. By the time Allied escorts realized they were being hunted, the torpedoes were already in the water. Rath Coastal Command had exactly one job: find submarines and kill them. They had aircraft, they had radar, they had depth charges. What they did not have was a way to attack at night. The ASV Mark II radar could detect a surfaced submarine from 10 miles away.
Impressive technology for 1942. But radar only gives you a bearing and a distance. A white blip on a black screen. It does not give you a target. The pilot would pick up a contact, begin his approach, descend through the darkness, and then hit an invisible wall. The final 30 seconds. By the time the aircraft reached visual range, the U-boat crew could hear the engines. They would sound the alarm, crash dive, and vanish beneath the waves in under 60 seconds. Month after month, Coastal Command crews made perfect radar approaches. They arrived precisely on target. They dropped depth charges exactly where the submarine should have been. And they hit nothing but empty water. The statistics were devastating. In 1941, RAF Coastal Command managed to sink exactly one U-boat in the Bay of Biscay. One. Out of hundreds of attempted attacks, a success rate of 0.3%. That is not a strategy. That is statistical noise. The British tried everything. They dropped parachute flares. The flares took 18 seconds to deploy and illuminate, long enough for the submarine to dive and long enough to warn every U-boat within 5 miles. They installed more powerful engines so aircraft could close the gap faster. The U-boats heard them coming from 2 miles away. They developed acoustic torpedoes that could track engine noise. Without a visual fix, the torpedoes missed by hundreds of yards. They trained crews to attack faster. Physics did not care about training. By spring 1942, the experts at Coastal Command Development Unit had reached a unanimous conclusion. Successful night attacks on surfaced submarines are technically impossible given current limitations. The file was closed. The problem was solved. The solution was that there was no solution. But nobody told Humphrey Lee. Humphrey de Verde Lee should not have existed in the Royal Air Force of 1942. Born in Aldershot in 1897, the son of a vicar, Lee learned to fly with the Royal Flying Corps in 1916. He flew reconnaissance missions over the Western Front, dodging German fighters in aircraft made of wood and canvas. When the First World War ended, he resigned his commission and disappeared into civilian life for 20 years. Then, September 1939 arrived. Britain declared war on Germany, and 42-year-old Humphrey Lee walked back into an RAF recruitment office and asked for his old job back. The RAF was desperate for experienced pilots, so they overlooked his age. They posted him to Coastal Command, the maritime patrol force that everyone considered a backwater assignment. While Fighter Command pilots became celebrities and Bomber Command crews earned glory over Germany, Coastal Command crews flew endless patrols over empty ocean, searching for submarines they could rarely find and almost never sink. Lee did not care about glory. He cared about mathematics. During his first year back in service, he flew more than 300 hours of anti-submarine patrols. He filled notebooks with calculations, radar detection ranges, aircraft approach speeds, submarine dive times, visual acquisition distances, attack windows. His fellow pilots thought he was obsessive. His squadron commander thought he was wasting time that should be spent drinking in the officers' mess. But Lee saw something that nobody else saw. The math worked. The timing worked. The only missing piece was light. The breakthrough came during a routine night patrol in December 1941. Lee was flying a Wellington bomber when his radar operator picked up a submarine contact. Lee began his approach. Slow descent. Engines throttled back. Perfect course. Then, half a mile from target, his co-pilot spotted a fishing boat with its lights on. For exactly 3 seconds, those lights illuminated the water. And in those 3 seconds, Lee saw the submarine's conning tower, black against moonlit water, clear as day.
Then the fishing boat turned. The lights swept away. Darkness returned. By the time Lee reached the attack position, the submarine had dived. But Lee had seen enough. The problem was not power. The problem was not weight. The problem was not electrical engineering. The problem was duration. Flares burned for 30 seconds, long enough to warn the submarine and blind the pilot. What Lee needed was 3 seconds of intense light, activated at the last possible moment. Back at base, he sketched his design on a napkin. A powerful carbon arc searchlight, 24 inches in diameter, mounted in a retractable housing beneath the aircraft. The pilot keeps it off during the entire radar approach. Complete silence, complete darkness. The U-boat hears nothing, sees nothing, suspects nothing. Then, at exactly 50 feet altitude and 50 yards from target, the pilot flips a single switch. 22 million candle power erupts from beneath the aircraft. Night becomes day. The submarine freezes in perfect illumination. The bombardier has exactly 3 seconds to drop depth charges before the U-boat crew can react. 3 seconds. That was all he needed. The next morning, Lee requested a meeting with his commanding officer. The response was immediate and brutal. That is completely illegal under current electrical specifications. The aircraft generator cannot power a searchlight of that magnitude. Even if it could, the weight would make the aircraft unflyable. Even if it did not, the battery pack required would fill the entire bomb bay. Your idea violates 3 separate laws of electrical engineering. Request denied. Humphrey Lee nodded politely. Then he built it anyway. He had no official permission, no budget, no engineering team. What he had was access to the Coastal Command Development Unit's workshops and a grudging tolerance from mechanics who had seen too many good ideas die in committees. Lee started with car headlamps, modified, rewired, mounted on a wooden frame. Too weak. He moved to aircraft landing lights, brighter, but still inadequate. He needed something that could illuminate a target from 200 feet in total darkness. In March 1942, he found it. A 24-inch naval carbon arc searchlight, designed for battleships, drawing power that would blow every fuse on a Wellington bomber. The RAF electrical engineers were right about one thing. His aircraft generator could not power this monster. So Lee did not use the generator. He designed a massive battery pack, connected it directly to the searchlight, and installed the entire assembly in a retractable housing that dropped beneath the fuselage like a bomb. The modification added 800 pounds to the aircraft's weight. It reduced the bomb load by 4 depth charges. It technically violated 3 separate Air Ministry directives. His colleagues called it the Lee Light. They meant it as a joke. Lee did not laugh. His commanding officer discovered the project in May 1942. The confrontation was explosive. You have violated regulations, wasted military resources, installed unauthorized equipment on operational aircraft. I should have you court-martialed. Lee stood at attention. Perfect military bearing. With respect, sir, I request permission to conduct one operational test. If the device fails, I will personally dismantle every component at my own expense and accept any punishment you deem appropriate. His commanding officer stared at him for 10 full seconds. One test. You fail, you are done. Clear? Yes, sir. On the night of June 3rd, 1942, Humphrey Lee took off from RAF Chivener in Wellington bomber ES-986. His crew thought this would be his last flight before reassignment to a desk job. His co-pilot, an Australian named Alan Triggs, had volunteered specifically to witness what he called Lee's suicide mission. At 2:17 in the morning, the radar operator picked up a contact. Lee throttled back, began his descent. Approached in total darkness. The submarine was running on the surface, completely unaware that death was descending from above. Lee leveled at 50 feet, lined up on the radar bearing. At 200 yards, he could see nothing. At 100 yards, still nothing. At 50 yards, he flipped the switch. The night exploded into day. There, frozen in perfect clarity, was the Italian submarine Luigi Torelli. Crew scrambling on deck, conning tower gleaming, wake spreading white behind her. Lee's depth charges dropped. The submarine survived, but barely. Unable to dive, crippled beyond repair, she was captured by surface ships the following morning. When Lee landed at Chivener, he sent a 4-word message to headquarters. The device functions perfectly. 1 month later, on July 5th, the Lee Light claimed its first kill. Pilot Officer Wiley B. Howell, a 22-year-old American volunteer, illuminated U-502 in the Bay of Biscay. 6 depth charges, 90 seconds. 52 German sailors dead before they could send a distress signal. Within weeks, the kills were accelerating. U-159, U-751, U-335. Submarines that had terrorized the Atlantic for years were dying in seconds. Admiral Karl Domitz was receiving reports he could not believe. His unbeatable U-boats were being destroyed at night, in darkness, without warning. He issued emergency orders. All boats will recharge batteries during daylight hours only. Night surface operations are suspended until further notice. But daylight operations meant RAF fighters, radar-equipped ships, convoys with air cover. The hunters had become the hunted. But this was only the beginning, because while Humphrey Lee's invention was saving lives in the Bay of Biscay, Adolf Hitler was planning something that would test the Lee Light like never before. A massive offensive that would send more U-boats into the Atlantic than ever before. A desperate gamble to starve Britain into submission before American industry could turn the tide. In Part 2, we will see how the Lee Light faced its greatest challenge, how one young Canadian pilot used it to sink 4 submarines in a single night, and how a weapon built from car parts and salvaged junk helped win the most important battle of World War II. The Valley of Death was about to claim its greatest harvest. In Part 1, we met Humphrey Lee, a 44-year-old squadron leader with no engineering degree, who built an illegal searchlight from car parts and salvaged aircraft junk. His first test illuminated an Italian submarine in the Bay of Biscay. His second month of operations produced more kills than the entire RAF managed in the previous year. But here is what they do not tell you in the history books. Humphrey Lee's invention almost died before it could save a single life. Not because of technical failure, not because of German countermeasures, but because of the most dangerous enemy in any military organization: bureaucracy. The statistics from July 1942 should have silenced every critic. 7 submarines damaged or destroyed in 30 days. A success rate that jumped from 0.3% to nearly 40% overnight. Numbers that could win the war. But numbers mean nothing to men who have already made up their minds. And the most powerful man in RAF Coastal Command had already decided that Humphrey Lee was a dangerous fool. Air Commodore Jeffrey Bromett commanded 19 Group, the operational unit responsible for Bay of Biscay patrols. He had 30 years of distinguished service. He had written the tactical manual that every Coastal Command pilot used. He had the ear of the Air Ministry and the respect of the Admiralty. He also had an ego the size of a battleship. When reports of the Lee Light's success reached his desk, Bromett did not celebrate. He did not request more information. He picked up his telephone and called Air Chief Marshal Philip Joubert, the Commander-in-Chief of Coastal Command. "I want that device removed from operational aircraft immediately." Joubert was confused. The Lee Light was working. Submarines were dying. What possible objection could Bromett have? Bromett had several. First, the device was developed outside proper channels. Squadron Leader Lee had bypassed the research and development establishment, violated procurement regulations, and installed unauthorized equipment on operational aircraft. If every junior officer could simply build whatever they wanted, military discipline would collapse. Second, the weight penalty was unacceptable. 800 pounds of searchlight and batteries reduced bomb loads by 4 depth charges. That meant fewer weapons per aircraft, which meant fewer attacks per patrol, which meant lower efficiency. Third, and most importantly, the success was obviously a fluke. 7 kills in 1 month from one squadron using experimental equipment? Statistically impossible. The submarines must have been already damaged. The crews must have been inexperienced. The conditions must have been unusually favorable. Bromett's conclusion was absolute. The Lee Light creates a false sense of security and encourages reckless tactics. It should be dismantled and forgotten. The order came down on July 28, 1942. All Lee Light installations are to be removed pending formal review. Wing Commander Lee is relieved of squadron command and reassigned to administrative duties. Humphrey Lee had just been fired. But he had made one friend who mattered more than 100 enemies. Air Chief Marshal Philip Joubert de la Ferte was 60 years old and tired of losing. He had commanded Coastal Command for 14 months and watched the U-boats slaughter merchant ships at a rate that made him physically ill. He had tried every conventional solution and failed. He had listened to every expert and been disappointed. Now an obscure wing commander with a flashlight was offering him something he had not seen in 2 years of war. Hope. Joubert called Lee to his office on July 29th, 1 day after the removal order was issued. "Wing Commander, I have read Air Commodore Bromett's report. I have also read your operational records. The numbers do not match his conclusions." Lee stood at attention. "With respect, sir, the numbers speak for themselves. 7 submarines in 30 days, more than any other method in this entire war." Joubert nodded slowly. "I am aware. I am also aware that Air Commodore Bromett outranks you by 3 grades and has the support of the Air Ministry Research Establishment." Lee said nothing. There was nothing to say. Joubert continued, "However, I have operational authority over all Coastal Command assets, and I have decided to authorize a formal comparative trial. Your Lee Light against conventional flare attacks. Same aircraft, same patrol routes, same submarines. Let the numbers decide." There was a catch. Bromett would choose the conditions. Bromett would select the evaluation criteria. Bromett would write the final report. And the trial would last exactly 14 days. If the Lee Light failed to produce significantly better results than flares, it would be permanently canceled. Lee understood what Joubert was offering. 1 chance, 1 fortnight, against an evaluator who had already decided he was a failure. "Yes, sir. When do we begin?" "Tomorrow night." The formal trial began on August 1st, 1942. Bromett had designed the evaluation to be impossible. 6 aircraft, equipped with Lee lights, would patrol the Bay of Biscay from dusk to dawn. 6 aircraft equipped with conventional parachute flares would patrol identical routes at identical altitudes. Every contact would be recorded. Every attack would be documented. Every result would be verified by surface ships. The evaluation criteria were brutal. To be declared successful, Lee light aircraft must achieve a kill rate at least 3 times higher than flare-equipped aircraft. Less than 3 times would be considered statistically insignificant. Bromett expected the trial to end in humiliation. The first week would show no difference. The second week would confirm his prejudice. Lee would be reassigned to a desk in Scotland and never heard from again. That is not what happened. Night 1, August 1st. Lee light aircraft detect 4 submarines on radar. They approach in darkness, activate at 50 yards, illuminate targets perfectly. 2 attacks result in confirmed damage. 2 submarines escape but report being caught completely by surprise. Flare aircraft detect 3 submarines on radar. They approach in darkness, drop flares at 200 yards. All 3 submarines dive before illumination is complete. 0 attacks, 0 damage, 0 results. Night 2, August 2nd. Lee light aircraft sink U-578 in the western approaches. The submarine surfaces at 0230, begins battery charge, and is illuminated without warning at 0247. Depth charges bracket the pressure hull. The U-boat breaks apart in 90 seconds. No survivors. Flare aircraft achieve nothing. Night 3. Night 4. Night 5. The pattern continues. Lee light aircraft are achieving a kill rate of approximately 1 submarine every 2 days. Flare aircraft are achieving nothing at all. By the end of the first week, the numbers are devastating for Bromett's position. Lee light attacks. 12 contacts, 8 attacks completed, 4 submarines destroyed or damaged. Flare attacks. 9 contacts, 2 attacks completed, 0 submarines destroyed or damaged. Kill rate comparison. Infinity. You cannot calculate a ratio when one number is 0. Bromett requested an extension of the trial. Perhaps the second week would show different results. Perhaps the U-boats would adapt. They did not. On August 12th, Flight Lieutenant John Ninnis illuminated U-705 at 0334 and dropped 6 depth charges in perfect stick. The submarine exploded so violently that debris landed on the aircraft's wings. On August 13th, 2 Lee light aircraft, working in coordination, caught U-578 on the surface and attacked from opposite directions. The U-boat commander could not decide which way to dive. He chose wrong. Both aircraft scored direct hits. On August 14th, the final night of the trial, a Lee light Wellington, piloted by squadron leader Kenneth Campbell, illuminated 3 separate submarines in a single patrol. He attacked all 3. He sank 2. The final statistics were not close. Lee light aircraft. 23 attacks completed. 11 submarines destroyed or severely damaged. Kill rate per attack, 47.8%. Flare aircraft. 6 attacks completed. 0 submarines destroyed or damaged. Kill rate per attack, 0%. Air Commodore Bromett filed his evaluation report on August 16th. The report was 3 sentences long. The Lee light has demonstrated operational superiority beyond any reasonable doubt. I recommend immediate installation on all suitable Coastal Command aircraft. My previous objections are withdrawn without reservation. Humphrey Lee had won. But winning the bureaucratic war was only the beginning. Now he had to win the actual war. Joubert issued orders for mass production on August 20th. Every Wellington, every Liberator, every Sunderland flying boat in Coastal Command would receive Lee light installations by December 1942. That meant 200 aircraft modified in 4 months. That meant training hundreds of pilots who would never use the system. That meant convincing squadron commanders who still believed in flares. Lee threw himself into the work. He personally visited every Coastal Command station in Britain. He flew demonstration missions with skeptical crews. He answered every question, addressed every objection, and converted every doubter, one pilot at a time. The results were immediate and spectacular. In September 1942, Coastal Command sank 8 submarines in the Bay of Biscay, more than the previous 6 months combined. In October, they sank 11. In November, 14. The U-boats were dying so fast that Admiral Karl Dönitz could not replace them. For the first time since the war began, submarine losses exceeded new construction. For the first time since 1940, British merchant shipping losses began to decline. Dönitz was receiving reports from his surviving commanders that made no sense. They were being attacked at night, without warning, without flares, without any indication that aircraft were even present. One U-boat captain described his experience in his war diary. "We surfaced at 0300 to charge batteries. Conditions perfect. Moonless night, calm seas, no aircraft on radar. At 0312, the entire world turned white. A light brighter than the sun appeared directly above us. Before I could give the alarm, explosions bracketed the boat. We barely escaped with our lives." Another commander was more succinct. "They have found a way to see in the dark. We cannot survive on the surface anymore." Dönitz issued new standing orders in November 1942. All submarines will remain submerged from sunset to sunrise. Night surface operations are prohibited, except in emergencies. But submarines cannot fight submerged. They cannot recharge batteries underwater. They cannot make speed. They cannot attack convoys. Dönitz was asking his U-boat force to do the impossible: win a war without ever surfacing. The effect on German morale was catastrophic. U-boat crews who had once considered themselves elite hunters now felt like hunted prey. They gave the Bay of Biscay a new name: Das Tal des Todes, the Valley of Death. By December 1942, the Lee Light had fundamentally changed the Battle of the Atlantic. British losses were dropping. German losses were climbing. The convoys were getting through. Humphrey Lee should have been a hero. Instead, he was about to face the greatest crisis of his career. Because the Germans had figured out what was killing them. In the last week of November, British intelligence intercepted a series of urgent communications from Berlin to all U-boat commands. The messages were encoded, but the code breakers at Bletchley Park cracked them within hours. The content was chilling. British aircraft are using a new weapon, a powerful searchlight mounted on the fuselage, activated at close range to illuminate submarines before attack. All commanders must develop countermeasures immediately. Priority highest. The secret was out, and Admiral Dönitz was already planning his response. German engineers were designing a radar warning receiver that could detect approaching aircraft before they reached attack range. German scientists were developing a device to jam the ASV Mark II radar that guided British planes to their targets. German commanders were training their crews in new evasion tactics. Within weeks, the Lee Light might become useless. In Part 3, we will see the German countermeasures unleashed. We will watch as U-boat losses suddenly drop and British pilots start returning empty-handed. We will witness Humphrey Lee facing the terrible possibility that his invention has been neutralized. And we will discover the desperate modification he designed in 72 hours that saved everything. The war between light and darkness was about to enter its most dangerous phase. In Part 1, a 44-year-old squadron leader named Humphrey Lee built an illegal searchlight from car parts and junk. In Part 2, he defeated the bureaucrats who tried to destroy his invention and proved that the Lee light could kill submarines at a rate no one thought possible. By December 1942, the Lee light was installed on 200 aircraft. British pilots were sinking U-boats at 5 times the previous rate. Admiral Dönitz was losing submarines faster than Germany could build them. The secret was out. And now, the Germans were fighting back. On January 3, 1943, a U-boat surfaced in the Bay of Biscay and did something that should have been impossible. It escaped. The Lee light illuminated the submarine at exactly 50 yards. The bombardier had a perfect target. The depth charges dropped exactly where they should have dropped. But the U-boat was already diving. The crew had started their crash dive before the light activated. They knew it was coming. British intelligence confirmed the nightmare within 72 hours. The Germans had developed METOX, a radar warning receiver that could detect the ASV Mark II radar from 12 miles away. 12 miles of warning. 12 miles to prepare. 12 miles to dive before the aircraft ever reached attack range. In January 1943, Coastal Command aircraft detected 47 submarines on radar. They sank, too. The Lee light was useless if the submarines were already underwater. Admiral Dönitz was ecstatic. His war diary entry from January 15th reads like a victory celebration. The enemy's night attack capability has been neutralized. Our boats are detecting aircraft at sufficient range to submerge safely. Losses in the Bay of Biscay have dropped by 73%. The balance has shifted back in our favor. He was right. The numbers proved it. Lee light kills in November 1942. 14 submarines. Lee light kills in January 1943. 2. A collapse of 85% in 60 days. At Coastal Command headquarters, panic set in. Joubert demanded answers. The Air Ministry demanded explanations. Churchill himself sent an urgent memorandum asking why submarine sinkings had suddenly collapsed. Some officers blamed the weather. Others blamed crew fatigue. A few quietly suggested that the Lee light had been a statistical fluke all along, just as Air Commodore Bromet originally predicted. But Humphrey Lee knew exactly what had happened. The Germans had found a way to see him coming. Now he had to find a way to become invisible again. The METOX receiver detected the ASV Mark II radar by picking up its characteristic transmission frequency. Every time a Coastal Command aircraft used radar to search for submarines, it was broadcasting its position to every U-boat within 12 miles. The solution was obvious. Stop using radar. But radar was the only way to find submarines at night. Without it, pilots were blind. With it, they were announcing their presence to every enemy in range. Lee spent 3 weeks analyzing the problem. He filled notebooks with calculations. He consulted with radar engineers who told him that changing the ASV frequency would take 18 months of development. He talked to tactical officers who suggested flying lower to reduce radar detection range. Nothing worked. Then, on February 8, 1943, Lee had his second breakthrough. What if we do not change the radar? What if we change how we use it? His idea was elegantly simple. Instead of running radar continuously throughout the approach, pilots would use it intermittently. Activate for 5 seconds. Get a bearing and distance. Shut down for 2 minutes. Approach in radar silence. Activate again briefly. Adjust course. Shut down. The METOX receiver would still detect radar transmissions. But instead of a continuous signal that allowed precise tracking, U-boat crews would receive brief, scattered pulses that gave only approximate direction. More importantly, the final approach would be made in complete radar silence. No transmissions. No warning. The submarine would know aircraft were in the area. They would not know exactly where. Lee called the tactic Silent Approach and Execution, SAE. He tested it on February 14th with a volunteer crew. The first attempt was a disaster. Without continuous radar guidance, the pilot miscalculated his approach angle by 18 degrees. The Lee light illuminated empty water 300 yards from the submarine. The U-boat escaped easily. The second attempt was worse. The pilot activated radar too early, giving the submarine enough warning to begin diving. By the time the aircraft arrived, only the periscope was visible. But on the third attempt, everything worked. The radar operator picked up a contact at 11 miles. The pilot noted the bearing, shut down radar, and began his approach in complete silence. At 4 miles, he activated briefly, confirmed the submarine had not moved, shut down again. At 1 mile, one final check. The submarine was still on the surface. The pilot descended to 50 feet in total darkness. No radar, no navigation aids, just dead reckoning and prayer. At 50 yards, he activated the Lee light. U-519 was caught completely by surprise. The crew had heard the METOX alarm earlier, but assumed the aircraft had moved away. They were wrong. 6 depth charges, 90 seconds, 47 dead. The silent approach technique was not perfect. It required exceptional piloting skills and nerves of steel. But it worked. By March 1943, every Lee light crew was trained in SAE tactics. The kill rate began climbing again. February, 4 submarines destroyed. March, 9 submarines. April, 16 submarines. Donitz was losing the technology war, but he was about to lose something far more important. The night of June 7th to 8th, 1944, D-Day +1. The largest naval invasion in human history has just landed. 156,000 Allied soldiers on the beaches of Normandy. The liberation of Europe has begun. But the invasion fleet is vulnerable. Thousands of ships crowd the English Channel. Troop transports, supply vessels, hospital ships, destroyers, landing craft. Everything the Allies need to sustain the beachhead is floating in waters that U-boats have hunted for 4 years. Admiral Donitz sees his opportunity. He orders every available submarine to attack the invasion fleet. 36 U-boats sortie from French Atlantic ports. Their mission is simple. Sink enough transports to cripple the invasion. Kill enough soldiers to turn the beaches red. If they succeed, D-Day fails. If D-Day fails, the war continues for years. Millions will die. Flying Officer Kenneth Owen Moore does not know any of this. He is 22 years old, a Canadian from Rockhampton, Saskatchewan. He flies a B-24 Liberator from RAF Dunkeswell on patrol over the western approaches to the Channel.
His mission is routine. Search for submarines, report contacts, attack if possible. At 21:17 hours, his radar operator picks up a contact. Moore begins his approach. Throttle back. Descend to 50 feet. Silent approach protocol. Radar off. At 1 mile, he reactivates briefly. Contact still on surface. U-441, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann. Moore descends to attack altitude. 50 feet above Blackwater. No moon, no stars, just instruments and faith. At 50 yards, he activates the lee light. The submarine explodes into visibility. Deck crew scrambling, conning tower gleaming, wake spreading white. Moore's bombardier drops 6 depth charges in perfect stick. The explosions bracket the pressure hull. U-441 breaks apart in 90 seconds. No survivors. Moore banks hard, climbs, turns for home. Then his radar operator speaks. "Sir, second contact. Bearing 045, range 8 miles. Moore does not hesitate. He turns toward the new contact. At 21:39 hours, exactly 22 minutes after his first kill, Moore begins his second attack run. Same procedure. Silent approach. Radar silence. Descend to 50 feet. At 50 yards, the lee light activates again. U-629 is caught mid-dive. The conning tower is visible. The pressure hull is exposed. Moore's depth charges drop. The submarine does not break apart. It explodes. The detonation is visible from 20 miles. Debris rains down on the Liberator's wings. 2 submarines, 22 minutes. 104 German sailors dead. Moore is not finished. His patrol continues for another 4 hours. At 0147, his radar picks up a third contact. He attacks and damages U-373. At 0312, a fourth contact. He illuminates and attacks U-981. By the time Moore lands at Dunkswell at 0445 on June 8th, he has attacked 4 U-boats in a single night. 2 confirmed sunk, 2 severely damaged. His combat log entry is 4 words. Sighted 4 subs. Sank same. For this mission, Kenneth Moore receives the Distinguished Service Order and the American Silver Star. His crew receives Distinguished Flying Crosses. The Liberator receives a new nickname that will follow Moore for the rest of his life. Killer Moore. But Moore's achievement is not an isolated incident. On D-Day night, and the nights that follow, Lee light aircraft fly continuous patrols over the Channel approaches. They are hunting Donitz's attack force. They find it. June 7th to June 30th. 23 days. Lee light aircraft destroy 15 U-boats attempting to reach the invasion fleet. They damage 23 more. Not a single Allied transport is successfully torpedoed in the Channel during the critical first month of the invasion. 156,000 soldiers landed safely. 2 million tons of supplies delivered without loss. The beachhead held. The liberation continued. Admiral Donitz withdraws his remaining submarines from the Channel approaches on June 28th. His war diary entry is bitter. The enemy air patrols have made operation in the Channel impossible. Our losses are unsustainable. The invasion fleet is beyond our reach. The U-boat threat to D-Day is over. The Lee light did not win D-Day alone, but it protected the fleet that made D-Day possible. The numbers after June 1944 tell a story of total victory. In the final year of war, Lee light aircraft sink 87 submarines. They damage 143 more. They force Donitz to abandon night operations entirely. Total submarines destroyed or damaged by Lee light technology throughout the war: 212 confirmed, 312 probable. That is more than 1/4 of all German submarines lost in the Atlantic. Estimated Allied lives saved by the Lee light: 400,000 sailors and merchant seamen who would have died in the waters of the North Atlantic. The British press begins calling the Bay of Biscay the Valley of Death. The German sailors have another name: Das Todeslicht, the Light of Death. A captured U-boat commander tells his interrogators something that becomes famous. You would be running on the surface, confident in the darkness, and then God himself would flip a switch and turn you into a target. It lasted 3 seconds. That was enough. Admiral Donitz writes in his memoirs after the war, the introduction of the searchlight aircraft made it impossible to operate effectively at night. This single weapon, more than any other, forced us to abandon our wolfpack tactics and cost us the Battle of the Atlantic. By 1945, the Lee light is installed on 1,800 aircraft across 4 nations. RAF Coastal Command, Royal Canadian Air Force, U.S. Navy, Royal Australian Air Force. One invention, one man, 400,000 lives. But here is what the history books do not tell you. When the war ended, Humphrey Lee received no public recognition, no press interviews, no victory parades. His invention remained classified until 1946. He continued serving in the RAF. He never sought fame. He never wrote a memoir. When journalists asked for interviews, he declined. When the RAF Museum asked permission to display his prototype, he wrote back with words that define the man. The device worked because good men flew it. Tell their stories, not mine. Humphrey Lee died on November 19, 1961, at age 83. His obituary in the Times ran 4 paragraphs. The Lee light received 1 sentence. But the story does not end there. Because in 2008, something happened that would have embarrassed Humphrey Lee intensely. And it revealed a secret about his invention that even the RAF did not know. In Part 4, we will discover what happened when historians finally opened the classified files. We will learn the truth about how close the Lee light came to never existing. And we will hear the words that Humphrey Lee said to a young pilot in 1965. Words that explain why one man with a flashlight changed the world. The final chapter awaits. In Part 1, a 44-year-old squadron leader with no engineering degree built an illegal searchlight from car parts and salvaged junk. In Part 2, he defeated the bureaucrats who tried to destroy his invention. In Part 3, he watched it sink more than 200 submarines and protect the largest naval invasion in human history. The Lee light saved 400,000 lives. But what happened to the man who created it? Here is what the history books do not tell you. Humphrey Lee never became famous. He never wrote a memoir. He never appeared on television or radio. When journalists asked for interviews, he declined. When historians requested access to his personal papers, he refused. For 20 years after the war, the man who changed the Battle of the Atlantic lived in complete obscurity. And that was exactly how he wanted it. When World War II ended in 1945, Humphrey Lee was 48 years old. Too young to retire, too old to start over. He stayed in the Royal Air Force because he did not know how to do anything else. The RAF promoted him to Air Commodore in 1951. It was a respectable rank, not spectacular, not embarrassing, just respectable. He served in administrative positions that nobody remembers. He attended meetings that nobody recorded. He pushed papers that nobody saved.
his former pilots scattered across the world. Wiley B. Howell, the young American who scored the first Lee Light kill, returned to the United States Navy and eventually commanded the aircraft carrier USS Bennington. He never forgot the night of July 5, 1942. Kenneth Moore, the Canadian who sank 4 submarines on D-Day night, became a commercial pilot after the war. He flew passengers across the Atlantic on the same waters where he once hunted U-boats. Sometimes, on clear nights, he would look down at the Black Ocean and remember. Air Chief Marshal Philip Joubert, the commander who saved the Lee Light from bureaucratic death, retired in 1943 and wrote several books about coastal aviation. He credited Lee with turning the tide in the Atlantic. Few people read his books. Air Commodore Jeffrey Bromet, the officer who tried to have the Lee Light canceled, continued his career without consequence. He retired with honors in 1949. His opposition to the Lee Light was quietly forgotten. Humphrey Lee retired from the Royal Air Force in 1957. He moved to a small house in Hampshire. He tended his garden. He read books. He answered letters from old comrades who remembered the war. He never spoke publicly about his invention. In 1965, at a reunion of 172 squadron survivors, something happened that explains everything about Humphrey Lee. Wiley Howell, now Captain Howell, traveled from the United States specifically to meet the man who had given him his flashlight. He found Lee standing alone by a window, watching the younger veterans share their stories. Howell walked up to him and said words he had been preparing for 20 years. "Sir, because of you, I lived long enough to get married and have children. So did 300 other pilots in this room. We owe you everything." Lee smiled. He shook Howell's hand warmly. Then he said 6 words that define his character. "You owe yourselves everything. I just gave you a better flashlight." But his legacy was never about modesty. The Lee Light did not disappear when World War II ended. It evolved. After 1945, military engineers studied Lee's design and realized something remarkable. The basic principle, a powerful light source combined with precise timing and silent approach, could be adapted for dozens of applications. The United States Navy installed improved searchlights on its P-2 Neptune patrol aircraft during the Korean War. They used them to hunt North Korean submarines attempting to infiltrate South Korean waters. The kill rate was impressive enough that the Navy classified the results for 15 years. During the Vietnam War, American AC-130 gunships carried searchlights directly descended from Lee's original design. They illuminated targets on the Ho Chi Minh Trail at night, turning darkness into a killing ground. By the 1980s, modern versions of the airborne searchlight were standard equipment on maritime patrol aircraft in 23 nations. The technology had been refined beyond recognition. Carbon arc lamps gave way to xenon bulbs. Manual switches became computer-controlled systems. 800 pounds of batteries shrank to 50 pounds of lithium cells. But the core principle remained exactly what Lee designed in 1942. Silent approach, sudden illumination, 3 seconds of light. The total number of confirmed kills attributed to Lee Light technology and its descendants across all conflicts is difficult to calculate. Conservative estimates suggest more than 400 submarines, surface vessels, and ground targets destroyed between 1942 and 1991. More importantly, the Lee Light changed how militaries think about innovation. Before Lee, most military organizations believed that important inventions came from official research establishments. Scientists and engineers with advanced degrees working in proper laboratories. Committees and reviews and approvals. Lee proved them wrong. He showed that a middle-aged officer with notebooks full of calculations and access to a workshop could solve problems that entire research establishments could not. He demonstrated that practical experience sometimes matters more than theoretical knowledge. He proved that determination can overcome expertise. The lesson was not lost on military planners. After World War II, both the United States and British armed forces created new programs specifically designed to capture ideas from field personnel. The U.S. Navy's suggestion system, which eventually became the Beneficial Suggestion Program, was directly inspired by cases like Lee's. The RAF's Innovation Initiative traces its intellectual heritage to the officers who watched one man with a car headlight change the war. Today, militaries actively encourage junior personnel to propose unconventional solutions. The assumption that important ideas only come from senior experts is dead. Humphrey Lee helped kill it. But the deepest lesson is not about military innovation. It is about what happens when someone refuses to accept impossible. The experts told Lee that his idea violated the laws of electrical engineering. He built it anyway. The bureaucrats told him that his experiment was unauthorized and illegal. He conducted it anyway. The establishment told him that his success was a statistical fluke. He proved them wrong anyway. History is filled with people like Humphrey Lee, people who looked at impossible problems and saw solutions that nobody else could see. Percy Hobart, the British general who designed the specialized tanks that broke through German defenses on D-Day, was forced into retirement twice before Churchill personally reinstated him. The military establishment thought his ideas were insane until those ideas won the war. Barnes Wallis, the engineer who designed the bouncing bomb that destroyed German dams, was rejected by the Air Ministry for 2 years before a single officer finally agreed to test his invention. The bouncing bomb was impossible until it was not. Hedy Lamarr, the Hollywood actress who co-invented frequency-hopping technology during World War II, was dismissed as a celebrity amateur. Her patent laid the foundation for modern Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. The actress knew more about communications than the engineers. The pattern repeats across every war, every industry, every field of human endeavor. The impossible becomes possible when someone refuses to accept the limits that everyone else takes for granted. Humphrey Lee was not smarter than the electrical engineers who said his idea could not work. He was not more experienced than the tactical officers who said night attacks were impossible. He was not more powerful than the bureaucrats who tried to shut him down. He was simply more stubborn. And now, there is one final detail that most people do not know. In 2008, the Royal Air Force Museum at Hendon opened a permanent exhibition about the Battle of the Atlantic. The centerpiece of that exhibition was Humphrey Lee's original prototype, the jury-rigged searchlight that he built in his workshop in 1941 and 1942. The car headlamps and salvaged landing lights held together with wire and hope. When museum curators examined the prototype for the first time in 60 years, they discovered something remarkable. Inside the battery housing, scratched into the metal with a knife or screwdriver, was a message that Lee had carved before his first illegal test flight. The message read, "If this works, remember the pilots who flew it. If it fails, forget my name." Humphrey Lee never expected to be remembered. He built his invention to save lives, not to earn glory. When it worked beyond anyone's expectations, he gave all credit to the men who flew the missions. The museum installed a plaque beneath the prototype. It reads, "Designed in violation of regulations, built without authorization, installed against direct orders, saved 400,000 lives." That plaque tells you everything you need to know about Humphrey Lee. He was not a genius. He was not a hero in the traditional sense. He was a middle-aged officer who saw a problem that everyone said could not be solved, and solved it anyway. From one squadron leader with a car headlight and a stubborn refusal to accept expert consensus, to 400,000 Allied sailors and merchant seamen who lived to see the end of the war. From one illegal experiment in a workshop in Devon to 212 German submarines destroyed in the waters of the Atlantic. From one man who never sought recognition to a technology that changed naval warfare forever. Humphrey Lee proved something that every generation needs to learn again. The experts are not always right. The regulations are not always wise. The impossible is not always impossible. Sometimes the most important words in history are not "yes, sir" or "following orders." Sometimes they are, "watch this work." If you know another story like this, a forgotten innovator who changed history against impossible odds, share it in the comments. The world is full of Humphrey Lees. Most of them are still waiting to be discovered. And if you want to hear more stories of the mavericks and rebels who won World War II, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We release new episodes every week. Because history is not made by people who accept what they are told. History is made by people who build their own flashlights.